Welcome to another episode of Bitcash Breakthrough, your gateway to digital wealth. Please welcome John Heeter, a distinguished blockchain developer and expert in Antelope technology. With a robust background in the games industry spanning 7 years, John transitioned to blockchain development in 2016. He's been instrumental in building and nurturing projects on the EOS blockchain since its inception, notably Boyd, the longest running project on the platform. John's expertise extends across various projects within the blockchain space, where he continues to develop innovative solutions. Welcome, John.
Thanks, June. Really appreciate the intro.
All right. Hey, so I always start interviews by asking people, how'd you get into crypto? When did you first hear about Bitcoin?
Yeah, I guess I heard about Bitcoin I think it was like maybe around 2018, probably. I heard some things in the news about it, but I didn't understand it and didn't have anyone in my life that understood it. So it just passed me by. And then it was probably 20 when I started to really dive into it. And what clicked for me was like the sharing. What made it start to make sense to me is like with the rise of the sharing economy with Uber and Airbnb, because I was using both of these every day. And just the idea of using technology to the old institutions, these old ways of doing things, using technology to do things in the correct or like in the new way or whatever. And so when you take that kind of mode of thinking and apply it to the monetary system, suddenly, oh, okay, got it. This all kind of makes sense now.
And then, so you had a background in gaming, though. So where you were working in that industry while you started learning about crypto?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Was there anything in particular with your experience on the gaming side that where
Honestly, yeah, no, like at first you don't totally see there's a connection, but games is all about applied game theory. It's about understanding what motivates people and incentivizing them to do XYZ, rewarding them, punishing them, things like that. And these blockchain networks, these decentralized networks of nodes all over the world where you can't trust a single entity, it's applied game theory at a huge scale. Also, like I find a lot of people in the blockchain space from the games industry, it seems. And the reason is because I think the idea of virtual goods is already something that we understand intrinsically, or the idea of like things on a computer that have some value in some way. Like it's cool. It's something we already understand. So the idea of crypto networks is like a natural extension of that. It's if like taking the attributes of physical objects and applying them to digital objects. So you're upgrading digital objects with some attributes that traditionally were only applicable to physical objects.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, and Vitalik mentioned that I think his experience with World of Warcraft and the control of gold, or the ability for the game creators to control the supply of gold, was one of his major issues. And you mentioned Uber, Airbnb, and the sharing economy, and it's precisely what you worked on with Boyd. It seems very similar, where people can share their compute resources. So what was the inspiration behind that? Was that this idea of the sharing economy that got you
Yeah,
going?
I was like, because I was really trying to understand mining. I was like, oh, so people just burn electricity in exchange for the chance that they will get to produce the next block and collect the reward on the Bitcoin chain. And I always was just like, there's got to be like a better use of the electricity, or a way that we can make mining actually useful as opposed to just burning electricity. And that's like something that, and also it was hard for me to wrap my head around. But I came across this project called Gridcoin, which is like an early project, its own blockchain, that it's a fork of Bitcoin, or I think it might be like a fork of like Peercoin, the first proof of stake blockchain. And the idea was that it incentivized contribution to these distributed science projects. So essentially, by contributing to these volunteer science projects, you could also mine these. And what was really interesting to me about that is that people already donate their computing power to these science projects completely for free, and they've done it for like decades. So the idea that you take something that people already are willing to do for free because they believe in the story and they want to contribute to the public good, it's competitive, they like to compete with their friends, there's groups that are on leaderboards and things like this. And when you take the amount of computing power that individuals just volunteer for free, it's comparable with some of the world's fastest supercomputers. So all that kind of stuff was just like so fascinating to me. And that really helped me to grasp the concept of like mining and how these things could work. And now I understand proof of work, and I'm like, yeah, it's actually important for the proof of work to not to be worthless, to not have any use outside of the blockchain, because then you get into all kinds of game theory issues. But I think that there's a place for like community currencies that are based around all kinds of different ideas. Oh, we want to reward people for doing this. We want to reward people for doing that. And people can gather around these currencies and say, we find value in this thing because it incentivizes people to do things that we agree with or that we like to do. So this is the basic idea of where I came from.
Yeah, that's great. That's an interesting thought that you or concept about proof of work mining. You said after understanding it, you're saying now that it's better that the proof of work system doesn't have a kind of these. And
Yeah.
maybe you can explain that a little bit more, because people in the past have created these things precisely for the reasons you mentioned. And you were probably somewhat inspired as well, because you're saying, hey, at least initially you thought it was probably
kind of naive. It's a naive, I think. This is because I used to follow like Andreas Antonopoulos and a lot of the kind of really technical Bitcoin that are not as big today as they used to be. Like in 2017, 2018, they were pretty big. But the idea of proof of work is that the value of the proof of work, or the value of the hardware that you're buying and the value of what you're doing, should be completely worthless outside of the core consensus mechanism of the chain. And the reason is because if there's some value to doing that thing outside of the chain, then it is basically becomes friction. It becomes a competition with the chain itself. So suddenly it becomes easy to 51% attack the chain, right? Because the chain is protected by 51% attack. It's assuming that someone is not just going to throw away money. It's assuming greed, right? But if someone is able to generate money in some other way and attack the chain, then suddenly the chain is not secure anymore. So that's one of the probably the largest reason.
Okay, that's a good way to explain that. Okay, so moving on. So at least the inspiration, well, you're saying, okay, maybe it was naive, but then now you're saying with this type of system, though, you could create a community type of currency. So what's your thinking, yeah, these days on how these?
I think like Bitcoin is its own kind of monster. And I think it's like the community around Bitcoin and that whole ecosystem, or whatever you want to call it, is they have a very specific mission. They have a very specific goal, and they stick to their guns and they won't change. And that's the selling point of Bitcoin, is that it's got all these fanatics that will never let it change. And it's always going to be the way it is. And that helps to protect it. As an investor, I have confidence that this thing isn't going to they're not going to try and do something crazy with this thing. So this is actually a selling, like some people don't like that, but that's actually the biggest selling point of Bitcoin. If they start upgrading it and changing it, then this is like a big problem. So this is why people build all these L2s and other things on top without modifying the base layer. And that's Bitcoin is also using proof of work as its core consensus mechanism, whereas most projects today are using something that's more like a multi-sig, where you have trusted custodians that are voted in and out of a multi-sig. You have some kind of a proof of stake or delegated proof of stake system. People generally are not using proof of work as the consensus mechanism anymore. It's out of style now. And so anything you put on top of the proof of the consensus mechanism you're using, like anything you put on top of the proof of stake, proof of work, it doesn't really you don't have to hold it up to the same level of scrutiny that you would be holding proof of work to in the way that I just described, because it's just an element inside the system as opposed to the system itself, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay. And with that, how do you see Boyd right now with on a more of a proof of work system and as maybe more of a community currency?
Yeah, just the thing, if you think about currencies throughout human history and what we have now, like the currencies that are issued by governments, this is essentially when you try to think about what is this currency, like what does it capture, what does it represent? Every fiat currency effectively in a very simple way. It reflects the trust and authority that people have in that system to be able to be stable, to be able to be a good custodian of its currency over time. So the Philippine peso, the US dollar, the Thai baht, these currencies are all reflections of a lot of times the politicians and the way that those countries have been governed over time. It's like in the age of the internet and all the innovation that we have, it's crazy that we still are using this kind of antiquated government currency system. It's like, why? Like, we can now capture ideas in the same way that fiat currency captures the value of that government. Who's to say you couldn't capture the value of many other things, right? We can disintermediate the ability to capture value, right? So this is what I mean when I say like community currencies and like community projects, where it's just like Dogecoin. It's just people coming together and saying, I think that this funny icon is fun and I'm going to hold on to this thing and give it value. That's it. That's actually a really powerful idea, like the power of memes and things like that. So Boyd, if you had to condense it down, it's, I believe that contributing to these things is important, and I want to find and support other people that feel the same way as me.
That sounds good. And maybe just as a refresher, because maybe I skipped this because I didn't explain what Boyd is. So how do you explain Boyd to others?
Yeah, like Boyd is like a system that incentivizes people to contribute to scientific research projects, AI, and other kinds of high performance computing type work. And it does so in a way that's accessible and easy for anyone that has a computer to participate in. This is something that I focus on a lot, coming from the games industry and understanding user interface and user experience, how to make systems that are fun and easy to use, even though behind the scenes it's very complicated and very technical, trying to disintermediate the participation in these blockchain networks, because less and less people are running nodes and actually doing things that contribute to these networks. More and more people are just holding them on their exchange accounts and things like that. So that's why everything that we build is like fully on chain, but we also at the same time we build things on chain, and then we think and work really hard to make them actually easy to access and usable for people that don't know what that even means. So you shouldn't need to understand what kind of technology powers this thing in order to use it. So you can log in with your email and password, for example, on the new system. And we always have focused on like the Boyd desktop app is like very simple compared to the technology that's running behind it and things like that.
Okay, so essentially someone runs a computer program on their computer, and then it just contributes its resources, like compute resources, to these scientific projects. And that's great. And you mentioned, and how's that going? You also even mentioned AI. It seems as though being able to gather these resources, it's number one, it seems like an incredibly challenging project, right? Like you say, to be able to get this done with the efficiencies that you probably need to get it done. And so how do you see that? Okay, so it's mainly compute resources, so GPU resources as well. How does that work? And
Like we have a lot of tech, but most of the technology is actually just gluing these other technologies together in a way and putting a nice, easy to use interface on top of it, which sounds like, oh, your technology is like really simple, but it's like simplifying all this stuff is actually like very complicated. But basically, like we use Slowly at Home, Boink, and proof of work type applications and our own kind of custom implementations, and we glue that together in an interface that's easy to use. So that's where the differentiator for Boyd is, because there's many like distributed computing projects out there, but they're mostly aimed at IT people, sysadmin types of people that are not afraid to use a command line. So this is like our differentiator, is that when you log into Boyd, it feels like a game. It feels very easy.
awesome. And yeah, tell me more about just the technology behind it to be able to maybe abstract a lot of these things away, because blockchain is naturally just a difficult technology to use.
Sure.
Sometimes it's performance, most of the times it's just key management and just the nuances of the technology. And yeah, tell me about how kind of Boyd is built to abstract away some of the complexities, I guess.
Probably one of the largest things with the new, because we basically rebuilt Boyd over the past year and just launched a new version. And the previous version of Boyd was a hybrid system where there was a traditional off-chain account system and you would link your blockchain account with that. And I always wanted to have it to be totally on chain, but I didn't have the I was still learning the technology as I was building it. So it was difficult. But then once we spent years working on Boyd and working on many other projects, we learned so many lessons and we're like, okay, I think we're ready now. We understand how to actually build this the way that we want to. And so we built it so that there's no off-chain account system anymore. It's completely on-chain. It has its own sub account system. Sorry about that. It has its own sub account system, and the sub account system is completely contained within its own system smart contract. And people can create accounts, and they can, by paying like a fee basically to create an account. And this is to help save against spam and provide some Sybil resistance. But the key is that you don't have to pay the fee yourself. Like, anyone can pay the fee for you and give you a link, an invite link that you can sign up for free essentially, and then they get a commission for inviting you. So that's just an example of like how we thought about onboarding and how we thought about finding the balance between making things easy and accessible and also making them totally on chain and while remaining secure and preventing against attack from spammers. Additionally, we don't require you to use a blockchain wallet. You can just log in using like an email password type system. When you do this, it actually generates a private key in your web browser and uses that key to sign transactions that go on chain. And to do that, we run the transactions through a special node that anyone can run. We call it a Boyd relayer. And a Boyd relayer takes the transaction that you signed in the web browser and wraps it inside a full transaction for submission to the blockchain and pays for the resources, pays for the CPU or whatever is needed to get that transaction on chain. And we run relayers, and other community members run relayers as well. So you can run your own relayer if you want to. So that's just some examples of how we try to think differently and try to build systems that are accessible to a wide audience.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, and then I'll talk to you more offline of the technical details around the transaction signing and relayer. But yeah, just in terms of, maybe you can share a little bit about your experience with Antelope. What do you think of the technology? What are the pros and cons that you've noticed?
I remember when I started working on Boyd, I actually wrote this blog post like in 2017, I think. I wrote this blog post about why, or maybe it was like early 2018, about why I decided to use the EOS technology. And it was like, from studying how the EVM worked, I just saw so many problems with the design of the EVM. I always felt like it was good enough, but because of some of the design decisions, they made it very easy for people to like shoot themselves in the foot. And you saw this many times with so many hacks and so many problems happening on Ethereum. They've mostly solved these problems by building these libraries and development tools that helps you along the way. So it's taken a few years for the infrastructure around the tooling to mature. So it's much better now. But that was always the thing that irked me about the EVM. I was like, it's okay. I feel like we can do a lot better. And I was always fascinated with BitShares and Steemit and that kind of branch of technology. Just building something that was just completely different from everything else and had different ideas about how things should work. And I just was always fascinated by that. So when I saw that Dan Larimer was working on a new project called EOS, and it was going to be like an extension of these things he built before, I was like, oh, cool. This is a really interesting idea from a technology standpoint. There's a lot of good ideas here. And I would say today, honestly, still to this day, it's still probably the most performant blockchain software out there, just in terms of raw throughput and efficiency and ability to get transactions on chain. It has some really powerful features for infrastructure providers, people that run the nodes, and also for developers that build applications. Obviously, there's limitations, but the limitations to me are not a big deal. And actually, I find them to be like easy to work inside that gives you some structure for how to build things. So I actually prefer building blockchain applications over traditional applications, because writing your authentication layer on a traditional Web 2 application is very bad. The process is very hacky, and you never really feel like this thing is actually secure. It's just, and then like when you build on a blockchain, it's like the authentication is just built into the wallet. You don't have to worry about that as a developer. And storage and things like this is also provided by the chain. So yeah, like I really, working with Antelope technology, it really feels like what you would call Web 3.0. Like it really feels like an upgrade and an extension of what we were doing in Web 2. And I really feel still today, like I went back, I am working on like some side projects that are Web 2, and it feels so antiquated writing your own authentication systems. I'm just like, wow, I never knew what I had until I didn't have it anymore. And now I have to, it really does genuinely feel like a downgrade. But a lot of people don't have that mentality. I think a lot of people think, oh, if you're building it on the blockchain, you're making everything way more complicated and everything's going to be more expensive and harder. And it's, no, I'm to the point now where it's actually easier to build it on chain than to build it off chain. So
yeah, that's great to hear. Great to hear your perspective on that. And you've also worked on IBC, right, on Antelope. Maybe you can share a little bit about your experience there.
that was part of the original pitch, was like, oh, we're going to build this high performance chains and we're going to link them together using IBC. And I was always like, exactly, that's exactly what we need. We're going to have thousands of chains that are all communicating trustlessly using IBC. That's how we're going to scale this thing out. It's going to be great. And the IBC ended up taking a little, maybe 4 or 5 years longer than people thought. But it finally happened. And the new IBC system that was funded by which I really appreciate the work that they did, is great. I mean, for the most part, obviously it's not perfect, but it does exactly what was originally promised. And we've used it to great effect. We've built a system called AntelopeX.io that hooks into the IBC contracts that are set up on Telos, EOS, and Wax. It allows you to move tokens between them. And we even built our own custom smart contracts for moving NFTs across chains. So you can move void NFTs back and forth across various chains. And as far as I know, we're the first project to build a CNFT implementation.
That's fantastic. And is it like, it's mainly for tokens and NFTs, which is another kind of further step, but then I guess true IBC would be doing kind of smart contract interactions fully. Is that a possibility with this?
Oh, it is. And it is fully, there is an off-chain worker that anyone can run. You need a full node and you need to run this special database basically for generating the transactions, but it's not based on trust. And it's actually possible for that functionality to be integrated into a regular node. So then you wouldn't need these special nodes, because the regular nodes would have the correct data structures to handle IBC already. But yeah, it is like, at least among Antelope based chains, it is trustless.
Okay. And then you could do, you're saying full smart contract communications and actions if you wanted.
No, any information, like all it does is it passes messages, right? So it's just passing some information from one chain to the other. And then what you do with that information is up to your smart contract. So by default, the contracts that were provided are just for moving tokens. We just took those contracts and modified them to support NFTs instead of tokens. And it was really, it was like maybe a week of development and then another week of like testing and building the interface. It really wasn't actually as much work as I expected. So
gotcha. Okay, you simplified that. I guess it is essentially message passing. So you also wanted one of the first platforms to encourage or had the concept of IBC was Cosmos, right? They're the ones that wanted to build the internet of chains. So what about compatibility with their ecosystem?
Yeah, their system is like very specific to the Tendermint consensus mechanism that the Cosmos chains use. And it's very good. It's trustless and it works very well. Like I have no problem with it. And I always was rooting for that Atom and Cosmos. I always thought the technology was good. The primary reason I did not, and I was actually looking at building Void as like a Cosmos chain. I just felt like the kind of development process, like the development tools and things like that were not good enough yet. And also they really went 100% into this kind of app chain direction where like every single application has its own blockchain, its own chain that's proprietary and built to do exactly what that application needs to do. And this is called like a modular. You could call this modular or app chain, as opposed to something like Ethereum, which is more of a monolithic style where we're going to put everything on the chain, on one chain. And I always felt like there's got to be like something in between, because every application having its own blockchain creates a whole new set of problems, which is the problems that you see in the Cosmos ecosystem. Is there's a lot of like fragmentation, because it's, even though the chains can directly talk to each other, like that doesn't necessarily mean all the exchanges and all the tooling can all communicate seamlessly between the different chains. You know what I mean? So I always thought, oh, the kind of monolith, and EOS is also a mixed style chain. So my thinking was always like, okay, so as the IBC technology develops and gets more flexible and more tooling is around it, we'll see more smaller chains start branching off from these main chains. So let's say you launch on a main network, and then once you have a certain size community, then you launch your own side chain, right? That communicates with the main chain, but you use the side chain to store more data and basically save on resources. But yeah, that's the scaling. I could definitely, and that was even in the original Boyd white paper, was that Boyd would eventually be its own, using IBC to communicate with these main networks. And I still see that happening eventually.
Okay. And you mentioned that that was a problem though, to maybe start this way where it gets fragmented, and but technologically it's, if you do have IBC, maybe you're saying it's just that it may just not be compatible with everything that you could make compatible if you're more monolithic. There's just like everyone
Exactly.
integrates. Okay. Gotcha.
Because
Okay.
because on a monolithic chain, everything is already connected to everything else because they're on the same hardware.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. All right. So I guess yeah. Do you have any kind of words of advice for builders, developers, maybe that are coming into this ecosystem
Yeah.
that you've learned throughout the years? I mean, you've been at it for a long time.
My number one thing, honestly, is like people underestimate the importance of being comfortable with your like setup. And when I say setup, physically, you need to be comfortable in your space where you're working, and also like your tooling, like the software you're using, the entire stack of like websites that you need to use, applications that you need to use in order to build something. It should be like very comfortable. You shouldn't be fighting against your environment or fighting against the tooling. Once you have all these things lined up in a way that you're comfortable with and that you can work with seamlessly, suddenly doing the work becomes so easy, right? You don't realize how much of the friction of getting work done is like these things that a lot of people don't put too much thought into.
Okay. And yes, and then you need to work on technology that has a lot of good tooling and that has a lot of, so that you can be comfortable, right? And
Yeah, that's
yeah,
another thing. It's
yeah.
like if you're like looking at different technologies and trying to figure out like, oh, I should use this one or that one. Like people, they just read like the splash page, they read like the homepage, and it does this and this, and it's, oh my god, this thing solves all my problems. But then you go to the documentation and they don't even mention how to do the thing on the homepage. So you're sitting there and you're like, oh, this feature is not finished. It, like they did a prototype and then they forgot about it. It's really important to actually go to the real like documentation and make sure that this technology actually does this thing that you want it to do in production at scale and is documented to do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's, yeah, that makes sense. And so what are you working on these days with Boyd? Any future plans or any, like, what's on the roadmap for John?
Yeah, with Boyd, like we launched the new version that I mentioned on the Telos mainnet. We did like a soft launch. Basically, we're not really doing a marketing push or anything. We just wanted to get the technology up and running for the existing Boyd community. And we have a basic interface. This is the number one reason we haven't done like the marketing push, is because we want to build a completely new interface, and that's going to take some time to get it the way that we want it. Yeah, we did the IBC NFT stuff, and we've been putting the new Boyd system through its paces. You can like stake NFTs and earn bonuses in the system and things like that. You can generate invite codes and earn commissions when you invite your friends and things like that. So we have all the core functionality that we want. So the next step is build the improved Boyd interface, but also to build other systems on top of Boyd. Like I was talking about, we're working on like an AI system that's going to hook into Boyd. And that's actually higher priority for us than building the new interface, because we think that this is going to attract a totally new audience to the platform that we from outside of crypto. Some AI stuff. I have some AI side project stuff that I'm working on in the meantime as well. So yeah, lots of AI, lot of mixing with blockchain. I think it's a great combination.
Yeah, that's great. And then specifically for Boyd, the AI feature, how do you see that working? Like, what is it?
Yeah, we're focusing more on like art generation. So using AI creatively to generate images like for NFTs, but we're doing it in a way that you've never seen before, doing it in a way that is totally unique. And maybe we're not really focused on this right now, but also the text generation LLM type things as well. But we're really more interested in right now for entertainment, like NFTs types and gaming. Yeah.
So the images, when you say, can you give us a little bit more insight on the uniqueness of this image generation kind of feature? Or that yet to be.
Yeah, look at what we did with Boyd, like the Boyd Avatar NFT project and the Alien Avatars, which is the NFT project we built on Wax. If you just look at what we did there and think about, how could you take this to the next step with AI? You'll have some ideas.
Right. So yeah, it's good. Look forward to what you guys come up with there.
Thanks.
So all right, sounds good. Hey, thanks so much. You've been helping our project out, and hopefully we got some projects in the future. We'll definitely be in touch. But any final words you want to anyone know about how to contact you? Maybe on Twitter.
Boyd.com. That's
Okay, Boyd.com.